All right, let's get into one of the most epic, personal stories of the entire Second World War. We're talking about General Douglas MacArthur in his journey in the Philippines, a saga that's really defined by a crushing defeat, an unbreakable promise, and one of the most famous comebacks in military history. You've probably heard this quote before: "I shall return." Just three little words. But these three words became so much more. They were a rallying cry for an entire nation. And honestly, they became the absolute obsession of the man who said them. To really understand why that promise had so much power, you have to go back. You have to understand MacArthur's incredibly unique and, deeply personal relationship with the Philippines long before the war even started. So before the invasion, MacArthur wasn't just some general stationed overseas. No, he was living a life in Manila that was, well, almost like royalty. He was a huge deal, a figure of immense power and prestige. Just look at his salary. Thanks to a pretty generous top-up from Philippine President Manuel Quezon, MacArthur was the highest-paid soldier on the planet. This wasn't just a posting for him, it was a seriously lavish lifestyle. And his title? He was the Principal Military Advisor, given the huge job of building an entire army from scratch. He was even made a Field Marshal of the Philippine Army, a title that didn't exist before him. He even got a solid gold baton out of it, because he felt it was crucial for commanding respect. But this cushy peacetime gig was about to come to a very sudden end. As the threat from Japan grew and grew, President Roosevelt brought him back into the U.S. Army full-time. He was now in command of all American forces in the region. The advisor had just become the defender. And then it happened. The Japanese attack was so fast, so brutal, that MacArthur's whole world and all his defense plans just completely fell apart. And the disaster was immediate. So MacArthur's big plan was to meet the Japanese on the beaches, using his fleet of B-17 bombers as the backbone of the defense. The reality? His air force was pretty much wiped out before it could even get off the ground. The new Philippine army just wasn't ready, and that bold defense, it turned into a desperate, chaotic retreat. His American and Filipino troops were forced back onto the Bataan Peninsula and the island fortress of Corregidor. And there, they were trapped. Conditions got absolutely horrific. Rations were cut in half, and then they were cut in half again. Soldiers were literally starving, forced to eat their own horses, mules, even local monkeys just to stay alive. Meanwhile, MacArthur was directing the battle from his headquarters on Corregidor, and to the men suffering on the front lines, he seemed distant. They felt completely abandoned, and as they starved, they came up with a pretty bitter nickname for him: Dugout Doug. It was a real blow to his reputation and showed just how far morale had sunk. But here's the twist. It was right here, in this moment of total failure and humiliation, that the central part of MacArthur's entire legacy would be forged. His escape was about to become more famous than the battle itself. Now, this is really important. MacArthur did not choose to leave. He was ordered out by President Roosevelt. FDR saw him as way too valuable to be captured. So a very reluctant MacArthur had to board a small PT boat and escape, leaving his entire starving army behind. As soon as he made it to Australia, he made that public declaration. And it wasn't just some press statement. For him, it became what he called his all-consuming passion. It was a personal mission, a national mission. He had to go back and fix this catastrophic defeat. But making a promise is one thing. Actually keeping it, well, that was not going to be quick, and it was not going to be easy. It would take 2.5 long, brutal years of fighting, of planning, and of non-stop political battles just to get the green light to make good on his word. So, from his new command center in Australia, MacArthur started the long, bloody island-hopping campaign, clawing his way back towards the Philippines. And he wasn't just fighting the Japanese. Sometimes it felt like he was fighting his own bosses back in Washington, too. His argument was really a two-pronged attack. On the military side, he insisted the Philippines were strategically essential. But his real trump card was political. He hammered Roosevelt, arguing that America had a moral obligation to liberate the 17 million Filipinos they'd left behind. He said abandoning them would be a stain on America's honor. And he won the argument. On October 20th, 1944, the famous moment arrived. MacArthur waded ashore on the island of Leyte, strode up to a mobile radio unit, and broadcast the 5 words the entire world had been waiting to hear. The vow was fulfilled. From Leyte, his forces battled their way to the main island of Luzon and finally liberated Manila, a city he loved but one that was now completely devastated. And in an incredibly moving moment, he finally met the gaunt survivors of his original army, telling them, "I'm a little late, but we finally came." But look, MacArthur's legacy is, to put it mildly, complicated. On the one hand, he was a brilliant general who pulled off an epic promise. On the other hand, he was constantly criticized for his massive ego, for hogging the credit, and for accepting a very questionable $500,000 payment from President Quezon while he was in Australia. So, in the end, who was he? Was he the hero who kept his word against all odds? Was he the master self-promoter who always made sure the cameras were on him? Or, and this is the really interesting part, is it possible that he had to be both? Maybe you couldn't get the hero without the massive ego. That's the question that still hangs over Douglas MacArthur.